and welcome to today's episode of the Radiant Soul Podcast. I'm Shirley, the host, and today I want to talk about grounding some of these spiritual practices that I talk about, because a lot of the stuff that I bring and talk about is very deep spiritual practices that can be quite up there in the air. And one of the key pieces to this, and it was something that I had completely forgotten about myself and hadn't been doing until last week, is this need to ground them, because we are physical beings living in a 3D world, and we are in and of the planet Earth, right? We cannot be disconnected from that. And if we believe that we are all one, then we are the earth as much as the sky, as much as the spirit, as much as each other, as much as everything, right? We cannot extract ourselves from that. But it's very easy to let that tie, that pull become very tentative, and to, especially when we're doing spiritual work, to be very much up in our heads, very much up and out. And, you know, even just like a lot of the practices, you know, to be in the absolute, to be in present awareness, it's almost like we kind of enter into this state of complete spiritual being and forget about the physical being and forget to ground. And one of the things that I was really, you know, in the last month, I kept being called back to like very simple acts of ceremony. And it's really interesting because I didn't let myself have those, right? I could see that when my boyfriend made his coffee, you know, he has all of these like amazing little intricate tools and things that make this entire experience of making his coffee a very sacred experience and a very sort of ceremonial practice. Now, he's not incanting any prayers when he does that I know of, like other than I need to keep awake for the next 3 hours to work. But like the act of that caring, the act of like this preparation of slowing down and preparing, you know, like he measures out his coffee beans, he pours them into his grinder. He actually changed his grinder from an electronic one to a hand one about a year ago. And so then he grinds his coffee beans by hand. And it depends on the coffee beans and the type of coffee he's having. He'll have to like reset the grinder to a different sort of size, I guess. I don't know. I hate coffee. But he has this whole thing, you know, and then he tips the grounds into a little container, you know, that goes into the coffee machine. But then he has a little a little thing with lots of needles, and he puts that in the coffee to aerate it into the coffee grounds. And then he puts it in his coffee machine, and he steams his coffee, and he steams, or whatever it is, I don't really know. He steams his milk, anyway. But the whole point is he goes through this little ritual that slows him down and is very considered, very careful, very grounded in physical presence. And I'd been watching this for a while and kind of feeling like a little jealous of this practice, because I don't drink coffee, right? I think it tastes utterly disgusting. Hilariously, I did a coffee ceremony led by this amazing woman yesterday, and you know, I was like in alpha. Every sip it was like, it's disgusting. Why would people drink this stuff? But I became very like jealous of this ritual that he had, this time that he took for himself twice a day to prepare his coffee, you know. And it could be seen as a laborious task, but he had turned it into this very beautiful, loving process of giving to himself, you know. And he even has like very beautiful coffee cups and glasses for every type of coffee he's drinking. And it's a very beautiful ritual process that he goes through. And I had been sort of desiring this, but not really knowing what it was again. And then I had realized that a few years back, you know, like I always used to do ritual energy clearings in our home. I used to always do a lot of ceremony. I always do and still do start all of my paintings off with a ceremony and close them with a ceremony. But I had somehow sort of like stopped doing this, and I'm watching my partner do this coffee every day, and I'm like, this seems to be like an element of love and an element of groundedness and an element of taking time in this whole process. And I started trying to think like, well, how can I bring this back into my life? And then I actually spoke with someone, and they just said very simply, write your prayers and bury them in the ground. No easy feat when you live on a third floor apartment and have no ground to bury in. So off I went to the local park with my spoon hidden in my pocket and waited till no one could see and quickly dug a hole under a tree and planted my prayers. But the very act of doing this really felt very grounding and powerful. And I realized that, this is the missing piece. It's all very well being very spiritual and knowing God and feeling God and knowing we are sourced from within, but without a kind of moment where we pause in the physical world and be with the physical element of what we're doing, then it doesn't get grounded. It sort of, it doesn't really help us, And I actually ended up yesterday, obviously Sunday fun day is cleaning day, and my partner was actually working, so I was doing it on my own yesterday. And I just really put intentionality into the cleaning. I turned the cleaning into a ritual or a ceremony, just in the sense of intention, like literally just being like, well, I'm going to, clean the house. I'm clearing us. I'm detoxing us. I am purifying our home, our living environment, ourselves in this act, right? And so then you can bring with intentionality ceremony into everything. One of the things I used to do, and I had completely forgotten and stopped doing this, was just before I ate anything or consumed anything, just like, may this nourish my body and my soul and that of all beings on the planet. And it was just a simple little thing I said to myself before I ate. I guess a bit like a grace, especially if you are religious, and you might say a grace before food. And I know Thanksgiving has just passed in America, and there is a practice of holding hands and going around the table saying what they're grateful for. But just taking that moment of intentionality, before you put something in your mouth, can you slow it down and make it a blessing for yourself? A simple act of water, like blessing the water. And again, I used to do this almost all the time, and it's like practices that I had just slowly dropped and forgotten about. And it was a good reminder for me last week to kind of come back to these practices and realizing that this was kind of the missing piece, right? I felt like I was missing something, and that's what it was. It was just those moments of slowed down intentionality. And, ceremonial, it doesn't need to be on an altar. It doesn't need to be this huge ceremony and practice, right? It can be, and it's beautiful. And I've actually been engaging in a couple of those and really benefiting from them. But it's also an act of just everyday care for yourself, everyday slowing down with present awareness. So when you are making your coffee or your tea, turning that into a sacred experience. And all that needs is a moment of awareness and blessing and intentionality. When I, one of the things I do when I'm on my mood time is when I flush the toilet, and if there's any blood, I send that blood to the earth. I send it as a blessing, as an offering to the earth. And we're allowed to do this. We're allowed to bless our lives, right? We're allowed to make them sacred. And it is in doing these practices that we bring God into the everyday, right? We ground the spiritual experience or the spiritual epiphany, we ground it into our experience. And then we become much more living, breathing vessels of the divine, because our lives become a blessing. And because we are using our lives as a blessing, and then things take on different meanings, then you can actually turn something that might not even be that enjoyable into a sacred experience, into something that becomes an act of love for yourself, for others, for the planet, for the whole of humanity. And so that's the invitation this week, is like bringing moments of awareness and intentionality into your everyday activities. You know, one of the things I do whenever I wash my hair is I shampoo it twice. And I deliberately will intentionally say and think, I'm washing away toxins, I'm washing away impurities, I'm washing away exhaustion or tiredness or whatever it is that I have been accumulating. And then when I condition it, I nourish, I wash in nourishment, I wash in care, I wash in softness and gentleness and tenderness. I wash in purity and cleanse. But sometimes it's like, even just if you can think of one thing, it's enough, right? It's that intention. When you soap your body, you know, you're washing away impurities. You're purifying yourself and you're purifying the earth with it. And set those intentions. And not just for yourself, you know, always add on everybody else, like the whole of creation. Omnibenevolence is someone keeps saying to me this weekend, and it's like, yeah, like that's it. It's like for the good of all. And that's when you become a blessing, and that's when you get to ground these spiritual states and really get to live on earth as divinity, in and of all of creation, part of it, one with it. So thank you for listening. I hope you have a beautiful, intentional, blessed week, and are a blessing to yourself and others in all of your activities, and turning your life into a little sacred offering, because you deserve that, right? You are this beautiful, powerful, radiant, wonderful soul that deserves that time to just stop and be worshipped, like kneeling at the altar of yourself. And what does that mean? That means taking those moments to cherish the sacredness of yourself and to bless yourself and all of creation with it, right? You know, it's all for the good of everyone. So have a beautiful week. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye. If you'd like to go deeper with your spiritual and soul journey and have someone guide you along the way, then the Sacred Soul Painting Journey might be just the thing for you. It's a 12-month container where we soul journey together in one-on-one sessions, and where you will receive unique downloads and transmissions from your higher soul essence and spirit team. And I'll also channel you your very own sacred soul painting, packed with energy light codes and activations for your unique soul path and evolution. To find out more, head on over to soulartbyshirley.com. Thank you for listening. Bye.